Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberkaş. It was a meeting meant to contain a growing crisis in Syria's besieged province of Idlib. After an airstrike killed 35 Turkish soldiers late last month, Turkey launched Operation Spring Shield to confront the Syrian regime head-on. Now the leaders of the two most important players in that conflict have sat down in Moscow. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had a list of priorities as he met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The most crucial point was achieved. Both leaders agreed to a ceasefire in Idlib that came into effect at midnight Thursday. The two leaders also agreed to joint patrols on a crucial highway that rebels and the regime have fought to control. Just before the meeting, Idlib saw deadly raids from the air. A Syrian rights group says a Russian airstrike on Thursday killed at least 16 civilians. The near-daily bombardment of Idlib has forced 1.5 million people to flee to Turkey's border. It's a situation that Ankara says is untenable, and the reason it will no longer stop migrants from making their way to Europe. But once reaching the Greek border, they have been met with tear gas and live fire. Will this latest ceasefire hold? And will the humanitarian crisis in Idlib see any relief? And to break everything down, I'm joined by Dima Moussa, who is the vice president and a founding member of the Syrian coalition, a major opposition group, by Ibrahim Olabi, who is a lawyer at Guernica 37 International Justice Chambers, based in London. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Ali Demirdas, a political analyst and regular contributor to publications such as The National Interest, Inside Arabia, and Fair Observer. Dima, Ibrahim, welcome. It's good to have you on set. And Ali, of course, you from the Washington, D.C. So, Turkish President Erdogan and Russian President Putin on Thursday held this crisis summit. It lasted about 6 hours. This is the third meeting in 2020 alone. And they came up with yet another ceasefire deal. So, Dima, tell me, how different is this agreement than the previous ones?
Well, this one comes at a very critical time. We have seen unprecedented escalation in the last few weeks, and we also have seen direct involvement by the Turkish military inside Syria in response to violations by the regime, the Syrian regime forces that have targeted directly observation points, Turkish observation points. So, you know, this has put everything that the Russian and the Turkish side have agreed on previously in a very critical position. So this was very necessary to happen and happen fast and truly come out with results that would save whatever is salvage, whatever is still there on the ground that could be salvaged, to ensure that the front lines are frozen and, yes, you know, stopping to some extent the humanitarian crisis that we are looking at today.
Yeah. So, Ibrahim, the ceasefire is already in effect as of today. Do you think this will be the final one? Or we will discuss later the articles of the agreement, but do you think this will be sustainable this time?
I think the main characteristic of the Syrian conflict is for things to be unpredictable. We don't know. Politics change, interests change. I mean, it was a high-level meeting that was held. It was called for a number of weeks now, and the situation, as Dima has said, has changed. So there are indicators that this should last this time. But we do not know. I mean, the regime has broken a number of ceasefires in the past. The Turkish president made it clear that they will retaliate if that happens. But, you know, for us, you know, in the legal and human rights field, it's not just a matter of ceasefires. I mean, if ceasefires is just between warring parties who respect the rules of law, that would have been fine. But it's about the regime targeting hospitals, targeting civilians, targeting schools, targeting markets. That is the problem, and that's what needs to stop.
Just recently, at least 16 people were killed in Idlib at a poultry farm, and 30 more were injured, and hopefully this will end as of today. I want to go to Washington, D.C., to Ali. Ali, What do you say? Have Turkey's demands met? Did Turkey get what it wanted, in your opinion?
It is how you see this agreement. If you see it as a half empty side or half full size, Turkey was wanting the regime forces to withdraw away from the Sochi agreement line along the Turkish observer points. It hasn't happened. Whereas the regime forces, actually Russia is going to patrol the M4 highway with the Turkish forces. So I can say it is 50-50. Turkey hasn't gotten what it wanted, but it has gotten something that will be useful in the future as a bargaining chip.
Yeah, Turkey and Russia also made a significant change with regards to the creation of a security corridor on the M4 highway. Let's listen to what the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu had to say, and then we'll come back and talk to you.
A security corridor will be established 6 kilometers deep to the north and the south from the M4 highway. The specific parameters of the functioning of the security corridor will be agreed between the defense ministries of Turkey and Russia within 7 days.
So, Dima, what do you make of this article? There's going to be a security corridor 6 kilometers north and 6 kilometers south of the M4 highway. Then its position will be negotiated later between the defense ministers of the two countries. What does that tell you?
That just tells me that there were serious negotiations that took place that lasted for 6 hours yesterday, and this also tells that both sides were holding on to some position that they wanted. Of course, I don't see that either side got what they wanted. This also provides, at least for now, the ability to freeze this area, these lines, and push the regime at least outside this area, stop it from taking any offensives. But as we heard, Turkey will retaliate if that happens. For the time being, I think as the guest from Washington said, it's you can look at as half full, half empty, but also as 50-50. And I think on both sides, nobody got exactly what they wanted. This also provides more detail on some terms in the Sochi agreement of 2018 that were not specifically stated. And perhaps this was the end result, which was envisioned probably more by Russia than Turkey.
But what will happen to M5 highway?
Well, the M5 now obviously is outside the equation, and prior to this operation, the opposition was in some places controlling the M5 areas, but this is perhaps one way to push also some of the other elements that both sides wanted to get rid of and push outside this area. But of course, as opposition, this is considered a loss, particularly for the people that lived in those areas and were displaced from them. They possibly and most likely will not feel safe to go back to those areas.
Yeah, what will happen to civilians moving forward with this agreement? Because they say a protection will be offered to these civilians. Their return to their homes will be facilitated. First question, where they're going to return to? Is there any town left? I'm not sure because of the this intense bombardment that's been going on by the Russian-backed regime forces. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a very valid question because I was just looking at some satellite imagery today of a lot of towns that were really carpet bombed by Russia and by the regime to rubbles. So there are a lot of civilians that will not have any place to go. The strategy of the regime wasn't, to particularly target combatants and through, targeted killings, but it was indiscriminate bombing using artillery, barrel bombs, and the rest. And so the first question he asked, is there a place for them to return? But the second question is, will the return be voluntary? And it was important to hear that this word was mentioned. in the press conference. And so we are yet to see whether it will be genuinely voluntary or not, and what they will be able to return to. Or will they reallocate to other places in Idlib or in other places controlled by Turkey or Turkey-supported forces? But the key idea is that now civilians that are stuck at the border will have a place, or should have a place, to return to.
Ali, we all know that, I mean, even the presidents mentioned that they sometimes differ in their policies, especially when it comes to Syria. They acknowledge that. How will they move forward, in your opinion, in dealing with the terrorists from now on?
The biggest problem is the regime defines the entire people of Idlib as terrorists. There are foreign fighters, definitely, they are defined by the United Nations as terrorists. But the problem is that the regime, Bashar al-Assad, sees the people of Idlib as terrorists. As long as he sees them as terrorists, the problem is going to remain, and in the future it is going to erupt at some point.
So, I mean, we're going to face yet another crisis in the coming future?
I mean, this was a pause. This was a temporary remedy to the bigger problem. But I'm expecting the clashes or fires to resume in the future. This is not going to hold.
Okay, Dima, you attended an international conference on Idlib. The U.S.-Syria's envoy, James Jeffrey, along with U.S. Ambassador to UN, Kelly Craft, they were here holding meetings with Turkish officials. They crossed into Idlib in a show of support to Turkey. What do you make of the United States statements in support of Turkey? Are they just rhetoric, in your opinion?
I think we're seeing the same, different ways of displaying the same type of support that we have seen from the United States. Just like the European Union, they have provided a lot of humanitarian assistance. But in terms of the political process, we have yet to see the real effect, the real influence that the Americans and also to some extent the Europeans can bring to the table. As a NATO ally, it seems like it was required to show some sort of solidarity. And also in light of the ongoing humanitarian crisis, this sends some sort of a message that we see what's happening. But again, until and unless there are true actions that can be translated into, especially in our world as the opposition, into true steps that, can proceed and can take us closer to a political solution. These are just perhaps morally supportive to the opposition, to some people in Idlib, and of course to Turkey. It was very important to show solidarity, considering that NATO as a whole did not release a statement with regards to what happened. So it is important that some of the NATO members, other NATO members, show solidarity with Turkey with this issue. But in the end, the political solution is the solution that we're looking after. I do agree with your guest from Washington about the inability right now to have much of an influence by the Europeans and, to some extent, the U.S. But really what really matters is, and this is something that we didn't hear a lot of details about from Presidents Erdogan and Putin, is what they are going to do in terms of the political process. This is where Russia can show its true commitment to the political process. It always says that it sees a political solution as a solution in Syria. So we need to see some sign of pushing something into the political process as well.
So, Ibrahim, how to set up a safe zone for about 1 million of Syrian civilians?
Well, the starting point is to make sure that there is a de facto no-fly zone over Idlib. Because it is mainly the aircraft with some artillery that are causing the displacement of civilians. But then also a safe zone, for it to be safe, it needs to be somewhat consistent. I think the primary problem that we have with civilian displacement is that they don't know whether they will trust it this time, that it didn't work last time. So there needs to be some predictability for people to return, or otherwise why should they risk moving again from where they are back to their homes if they still exist, and then out again. So no planes over Idlib, some predictability in terms of the patrols, that, signals for the people that this will last, and then obviously the push for the political solution. Now, it's interesting that they both talked about the political solution, but the regime always talks about a military solution. The political solution was always discussed since 2012, but all what we've seen is a military escalation since the regime and backed by Russia. This might be a turning point.
Yeah.
This might be a turning point of holding Idlib still, because the regime always calls for the complete control of Syria, and both presidents talk about the territorial integrity. So if they're going to keep Idlib in opposition control, that needs to be settled, and cannot be settled militarily, then it needs to be settled politically.
We know that Turkey and Russia, despite being on the opposite sides on various issues, they have been engaging in this delicate diplomacy over Syria. Let's take a look back at the diplomacy and how Turkey and Russia got to this point, and then we'll carry on our discussion. I want to get back to Ali. Ali, what kind of a message you think did Putin and Erdogan give to the world?
They basically agreed to not escalate the military situation to the point where both countries will go to war each other and pulling literally the entire world to the brink of World War III. I think this is one of the most important outcome of yesterday's meeting. We are not expecting Russia and Turkey to go to war each other. This is important. I think this is the message that they gave. They gave the message that there is still going to be negotiations going on between the two countries. This is a positive sign for the future.
What does this agreement leave Iran? Last week, the Turkish offensive also neutralized Iranian militia, and the pro-Iranian government media, let's say, has accused Moscow of abandoning the regime forces as well as the Iranian militia on the ground. What is your take on that?
It is as if Russia is trying to kick Iran out of Syria. There are, I think, a couple of reasons why Russia is covertly, so to speak, trying to do it. One is, I believe there is a secret agreement between Russia and Israel to keep the Iranian forces / Iranian proxies out of Syria. also, I think Russia has understood that Iran is no longer going to be an effective player in Syria, mostly because of what is going on in Iran right now. They are busy with trying to save the country from completely taken over by the virus. So I think these played an important role in Russia's decision to keep Iran out of the equation.
All right. Let's take a look at the European side. I mean, with Turkey opening gates to the migrants, the European Union scrambled to find ways how to deal with it. And the Greek police used violent acts against those immigrants. And Angela Merkel said a safe zone will be needed eventually in Syria's Idlib. Do you think this will help?
I mean, definitely, because the message that Turkey was sending by opening its borders is that we can no longer take any more refugees and people need to stay in Syria. And a safe zone, or as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands said as well in a recent statement, a no-fly zone over Idlib, all of these things assist. We've also seen the UK's foreign minister visit Ankara a few days ago in a show of sort of solidarity. We have a number of European countries, France as well. Although the well-documented disagreements between President Macron and President Erdogan are well known, they still came to terms that Europe needs to do more. But Europe is paralyzed in terms of its foreign policy. It is some member states of Europe that are able to act in one way or the other. But it must be absolutely condemned the way Greece is dealing with the refugee and migrants crisis. We've seen all the videos of the hostility shown against those boats with children and women. But let's just say that Europe now is, and European member states, as well as the UK, are building up momentum in standing with Turkey.
Do you agree this could be a wake-up call for the Europeans?
It definitely can be, and I think that certainly was the purpose of doing this step, that where Turkey said, look, we're no longer closing our borders, and whoever wants to leave, they can go ahead. The pressure needs to be put on Europe, and we had talked about how the Europeans have not been as fully engaged as they should be on all levels in the Syria crisis. So possibly putting pressure on them on one of the things that really affects them, that would really make them take some major steps and feel the criticality of the situation was necessary. Of course, it's unfortunate what we're seeing happening at the borders, and these countries that we are known for boasting about human rights and also accusing Turkey of they're saying, Turkey, you're violating human rights, of course, by opening and letting these refugees come, but at the same time they're targeting them with live ammunition and also trying to sink their boats. So you see here the hypocrisy. So I think this is one chance for Europe to really show its seriousness about dealing with this crisis, not just its symptom, but actually go for the underlying problem, not talk just about refugees, but actually let's get involved in how to solve the root of this problem.
Okay, last question, Ali. How do you think Turkey-EU relations will evolve in the coming future?
The Europeans have understood that they need to pay attention to what is going on in Turkey. For the longest time, they thought by turning their back, they would assume that there is no problem in Syria, in the Middle East. But here is the thing. When your neighbor, the next door neighbor, is on fire, you cannot simply shut your windows, shut your doors, and pretend that nothing is happening. Eventually, the fire is going to spill into your neighborhood, spill into your house. So I think this is the wake-up call for the European Union, and I expect some sort of cooperation from the European side vis-a-vis Turkey to alleviate the situation in Syria. The European Union would have saved a whole lot of headache if they had acted much sooner. President Erdogan has many times appealed to the European Union for some sort of support, financial or political, to keep the situation in Syria in control. of no avail.
Yes, that showed that he wasn't bluffing at all. I'm afraid we're out of time. Ali, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. Dima, Ibrahim, thank you very much for being with me on set. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.